Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. William Scott White, yes, a member of the Midnight Society, one of our official scientists, once again has decided he needs my assistance in hunting werewolves in Dogman. So he once again has awoken me from my slumber and even brought me gifts to indulge myself on. Absolutely delicious. A tad bit messier than preferred. Yeah, no worries. I will have to clean up the mess a little bit later. Without further ado, once again, it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy to venture into the madness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back to Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Yes, William White, an official scientist of the Midnight Society, has already found his way into the darkness of the fox den and is sitting around the late night fire waiting for us to all join him as we again burn the timber into the early hours of the morning. Tonight, we are going to try to again dive into science and allow William to really give a nice input here as to potentially what the whole evolution of the Dogman really is. Yeah, first, how you been, man? What have you been up to, eh?
Oh, I'm really good. Life's good.
Great stuff right there. Since you are an OG, in my opinion, in this Dogman aspect, especially with the NADP, because obviously Jody was the first person I ever saw from the NADP. Yet you were number two, man. You were actually somebody I saw on his YouTube page.
I
Yeah,
remember those days.
in the beginning, was it your own potential encounter that got you into this, or did you just find it intriguing?
It's probably started with the ancient lore. Around 2010, I had finished college and had a little more free time on my hands, and I started the internet was a lot cooler back then. I mean, for those of you out there who are 20 years old, you probably don't remember the internet from 15 years ago or older, but it was a lot less corporate. It was a lot more authentic. Web pages designed by some nobody who just wanted to share information or bounce off ideas. And I found some really cool web pages. I don't even remember their names, talking about various cryptids. Just one night when I was just browsing the web randomly, and I mean it had like I don't even see a lot of these stories come up anymore. It's like a lot of stuff just has gotten scrubbed from the internet and probably will never be back, which is unfortunate. But for the first time ever, along with Bigfoot, along with various lake monsters, Thunderbirds, one of my favorite cryptids, and all of that, for the first time ever, I saw that there were people out there who were reporting werewolf-like beings, and they, even back then they called them Dogman. which I thought was a ridiculous name, as do many people. But I scoffed at that. I said, okay, I could see Sasquatch. I could imagine Sasquatch existing. I could imagine lake monsters for sure existing. But a werewolf, come on. And I kind of just mocked it. But it was sitting there in the back of my head. And actually, one of the stories from that time period, and I have the picture saved somewhere, is of this fellow who was and it may actually be one of my favorite stories because there's old photographic evidence. This fellow who was a security guard at some sort of a factory or plant, and photography was one of his hobbies. So he had a nice camera. Well, his house was like a block or two away from the front gate of this plant. And one night when he's doing his job at the plant, I believe he went back to his house to get a quick bite to eat. And when he was heading out the door, he sees this thing moving underneath one of the streetlights near the gate of the factory, the plant that he's there to protect. So he goes back inside, gets his camera, old, talking like 1960s here, so film camera, and he snaps a couple pictures of it. And they're black and white, and they're not the highest resolution, but to me, they're some of the best pictures of what might actually be a Dogman out there, because you can zoom in on them and see this broad-shouldered, muscular shape. It's not like super high resolution, but there's enough that you can see it standing behind this lamppost with well lit. And I thought, man, that is some of the best cryptid evidence I've ever heard of. And that got me, chewing on the idea of maybe there are, upright canine type things out there. But then I went on to do some more schooling, got really busy with that, couldn't really focus on a whole lot of extracurricular things. And I ended up living in this house on the southern end of Cuyahoga County in a fairly rural area. Cuyahoga County is where Cleveland's located, Cleveland, Ohio. And this house was butted up against hundreds of acres of woods, and those woods actually connected to thousands of acres of green belt, these metro parks that they have in the area, which are beautiful metro parks, real nice to hike in and fish in and stuff. And those metro parks actually go all the way to the Cuyahoga National Park, which is, I believe the only national park in Ohio, but it's a very nice park area. And tons of woodlands. So you could believe that there could be things out there, despite it being so close to a major metro area. So I'm living in this house, and one night I have this dream, and I had not been looking into cryptids. I had been studying medicine. Actually, I was in medical school at the time, and so it wouldn't have been on my mind. But I had this dream that this 8-foot tall werewolf-like being came up to my window and was looking in the house. And I woke up. I actually went outside to check and see if there were footprints. It was such a vivid dream. There were no footprints. So just all in my head, like, holy cow, there's that's a kind of a terrifying thought that there might be these things out there. And then several months later, it's wintertime. I've told the story here on the show before. I'm walking my dog in the woods, not too far from the house, just in the tree line. And I'm looking down the tree line, and several hundred feet, it's wintertime, so there's no leaves, there's just snow. Several hundred feet down, I see this very large, I mean, estimating based on the distance, easily 8 foot from nose to the tip of its very bushy tail, black wolf dog thing that is facing the yards, because despite the fact that we had all these woods, there were houses. Each house was on an acre and a half lot. So I had neighbors, and it was looking into the backyard of one of my neighbors, and I was like, wow, that is a big dog, and I don't recognize it as any of my neighbors' dogs. That is something. We don't have wolves in Ohio. What could it be? We have coyotes, but that's no coyote. And I look down at my dog to see if she notices it. She doesn't. She's like sniffing at the snow, probably at some squirrel tracks or something. And I look up again, and it's looking right at me. And it has big yellow eyes. No question about that. Yellow eyes. I'm like, what the heck? This is wild. And then it smiles. I mean, like I've heard people describe this before, but this is 2013, and I'd never heard of anything like that smiling. But I mean, I could see its mouth curl back into like this mocking smile, like it was letting me know that it knew that I saw it. That's odd. And then I looked down at my dog again to see if she noticed it at all, and no, she didn't. I looked back up and it was gone. So that's my. I'm not saying it's a Dogman, but we don't have big black wolves in Ohio. I'll tell you that. And that's probably my closest possible encounter with a Dogman. And that definitely, got my brain ticking on the subject a lot more. Um, I went into school the next day and talked to my buddy who's a big hunter. He's very familiar with Ohio's woods and animals, and I'm like, "Hey, man, what do you think the odds are of there being a wolf here in Ohio?" And he's like, "Dude, there's absolutely no way there's a wolf in Ohio. We don't have wolves." I'm like, "Yeah, I know that, but I mean, I saw this thing. It's like you probably saw someone's dog. I don't know. I really don't know that it was someone's dog, but that definitely spurred my interest in the subject. And then, as I mentioned before, I went on to do some other schooling in Louisiana, where of course there's the Rougarou, and people talk about the Rougarou from time to time, and the just legends around the campfire and stuff. And I thought that was interesting. But that was where I started my first business. And my first business was actually a commercial cleaning business. So I had a lot of time on time to listen to stuff, because I would be I'd be buffing floors, running machines, carpet cleaning, sweeping, mopping, whatever. So I always had headphones in and I was listening to like YouTube, like it was a podcast. And I started realizing, people are seeing these things a lot. And even if 1 in 100 is actually a legitimate story, I'm not saying they're liars. I'm just saying, it's possible people saw something and misinterpreted it, right? But even if 1 in 100 is actually what they think they saw, that means there's something out there. Even if 1 in 1,000 is actually something. And being a logical person, having studied a lot of science, both biological and geological and physical science, to me, that meant the odds were too high that there was something out there in the woods for sure. Um, and eventually, I heard Jody on a show, and he put out the NADP's website, and said, "Hey, if anyone's interested, you could become a researcher, get in contact with me." So I emailed them and got in contact with him. They invited me to come out on a couple investigations here in Ohio. By that time, I was back in Ohio. The rest is history. I went out in Germantown with them several times, did some filming with them, and we did those, YouTube live call-in shows, which were really fun to do. But yeah, that's kind of how my journey into the subject started. So
It's great stuff right there for sure. Throughout the years, now that you've had a chance to digest this topic more, again, assumptions aren't good. I assume you've probably gone back and forth many times, like I have, just in
right.
my short time where I think this, no, and then, like I said, just indecisive about it to this day, whether or not it's an actual ravaged looking werewolf type thing. Like some people say, I'm still 50-50, meaning I don't know. And I am literally in limbo.
I think there's some sort of phenomenon that's going on out there. Um, and I know you call me your scientist, and I do have the bona fides to kind of have that role. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of things science does a poor job of explaining, or is not ready to explain. Um, I study some of the alternative histories of Earth and humanity and the beings that may have come into contact with us. And I am of the opinion that yes, there is a phenomenon going on. It is real. People are seeing things. I lean much less towards it being a purely biological organism that, lives on Earth all the time, just like a bear or a wolf or a deer or anything like that. I lean more towards it being a physical incarnation of some sort of a metaphysical, spiritual entity. And that may sound out there, but I mean, we're talking about upright walking dogs. So I really do think that along with Bigfoot, along with these mimics, white crawlers, 4chan calls them flesh gates. A lot of times they get just lumped in with the term skinwalker, which is inaccurate because that's a Southwestern Native American term. Um, but I believe that a lot of those entities definitely exist. People definitely encounter them, oftentimes have negative experiences with them. And I do think that they are, one way or another, some sort of a uh, extra dimensional, as in they don't reside permanently in our dimension, entity that has come into our reality, our dimension, and has, I don't know if it's by its choice or some other determining factor, taking on the form of those beings that we see, which can explain why we get such a variance in the description of the dogman that people encounter. Everything from something that looks just like a timber wolf or a gray wolf walking on its hind legs to something that looks like it came out of Van Helsing, the movie, or dog soldiers, or something that looks like the god Anubis, right? Um, and I do believe that these ancient gods, Anubis and Set from Egypt, there's a demon. You may recognize the name from The Exorcist called Pazuzu, which you might assume is just made up for that movie. It's not. Pazuzu is a historically described entity. I'm not going to say it's real, but the name is much more ancient than the 1970s film, and it was described as having a canine head, um, along with some other weird descriptions about it we won't go into, that don't quite match the Dogman. But I do think that a lot of these ancient gods and spirits that you know people have encountered throughout all of humanity are the same sort of thing. Some sort of an extra dimensional being that enters our reality, um, maybe to interact with us, maybe for other purposes, and people encounter it. And I think that's also why they seem to appear to people who are in moments of great emotional stress. A lot of these stories I've heard, someone's out in the woods because they just suffered a really bad breakup, or a family member had passed away, or something else very traumatic was going on in their life, and they were in a very poor emotional state, that somehow they feed off of them. Um, and so that's why people in those strong emotional states will be more likely to encounter these paranormal beings, rather than someone who's like, their life is good. Everything's good. Everything is happening as it should. Those type of people seem less likely to encounter them, based on the literally thousands of encounters that I've listened to and read over the last 12 years or so. So that's my take on it. I'm not saying that I know more than everyone else and that I'm right, but that's the theory I'm working on. Because there is such a connection between, sightings of both Dogman and Bigfoot, and also sightings of UFOs, or UAPs is what they call them now. One theory I found interesting that could potentially tie into my theory, but not as strongly, is that, the the creator beings, if you want to go that route, the entities that are thought by some to have seeded our planet, perhaps manipulated our DNA to turn us from, smart apes into sentient humans, um, that they didn't just stop with us, and that they had other creations that they used when they were more interacting, here on Earth. That perhaps the Sasquatch, served a purpose and were seated here on Earth. That maybe they were like guardians of the forest, if you will, or some other important thing, and that the Dogman may have been some form of a soldier, that they had created and brought with them for whatever purpose. And that when they left us, they left behind some of these entities. That's kind of ties into what I was saying, though that would be more of a physical form. And I do find that very interesting. And it could be that somehow they are related to extraterrestrial. Assumes that we know they came from outside Earth. But the unknown phenomenon where people are seeing these UFOs, these UAPs in craft and alien type beings that may or may not come from outside Earth. They may actually, some people think, come from inside of the Earth or from the oceans. But it could be that they're all a form of entity that, one way or another. All these things need to be looked at. They say that science has proven that multiverses exist, and I accept that. I don't dispute that. I think that makes sense. But to imagine that somehow these different realities, these different dimensions, if you want to call them that, don't intersect with each other at certain points, that doesn't make sense either. So, you could assume that at a different frequency, there's a whole different reality existing actually at certain points that share the same points of existence as places here on Earth, in our reality, and not just Earth. I mean, it could be other parts of our universe, our galaxy. Um, and that, the ancients believed this, that there are these weak spots in the veil, is what they would call them, or that at certain times of the year, the veil, if that's just a word that essentially explains why we can't see spirits, right? At certain times of the year, the veil was thinner, and it makes sense that at an area of an intersection, there would be some sort of a dissonance, a weakening of the two existences. And, since we don't know enough about it, we don't know that those dissonances wouldn't, one way or another, allow for something to pass from one existence into another existence, something from that world, that plane, to come into ours, or vice versa, which I think potentially could explain a lot of the weird disappearances where, someone will be there one moment and not there another moment. I do absolutely believe and accept the multiverse theory, and I think that quite likely plays a role in what we're seeing. The Four Corners region, which is, for those who don't know, that's where the state of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona meet. It's the only place in the United States where four states touch at a corner. It's also mostly Native American reservation land, and even before we drew the lines on the map, it was a very sacred area and kind of off limits in some of the areas. Certain mountains off limits and stuff like that. Well, in that region of the desert Southwest, it's not unknown, and this goes back to some of the stuff that I was reading on the old internet. For instance, like the Appalachian Mountains, which are very old, are very haunted and have a lot of paranormal activity, is the idea of crystal resonance. So I've mentioned it before, but all rocks, even if they don't look like it, they're actually all composed of crystals. They're small grains that are cemented together or fused together through heat, are actually crystals if you look at them under a magnifying glass. And every crystal has a certain resonance. Well, crystals actually also are a potential form of, like, digital storage, digital memory. So one of the theories is that, some, for, we don't know why, but that for some experiences, some instances, uh, certain events, maybe once again going back to the strong emotion, are kind of engraved or stored on the crystals of rocks, whether it's, a castle made out of rocks, or an area like the Appalachians that has very ancient granite and ancient metamorphic rocks, that they act almost as like a hologram storage thing that, for however gets activated at certain times of the day, certain times of the year, whatever. And that may explain some of the paranormal ghost phenomenon. It's literally just kind of a recording of something, and then of course you wouldn't really be able to interact with such a thing. So one that's partial to me, because they actually got some recordings of it in the, I believe it was mid or late 90s, in a small area outside of Germantown, Ohio, called Liberty. It might be Liberty Township. There's several Liberties in Ohio. I actually live near a Liberty myself. For several weeks, people were hearing, and it actually made it to the Dayton Daily News. Dayton's the largest city near there. People were hearing weird howling from the woods, and it got recorded at least once, and they there were copies of that on YouTube and elsewhere, just a few years ago. I haven't looked for it in a while, but it is a very wolf-like howl. And like I said before, wolves do not live in Ohio. And it's very loud and eerie. And people were complaining about this, so like I said, it shows up in the Dayton Daily News, which I don't even know if they exist anymore. Their headquarters is now something else. They probably exist mostly in digital format. But that one I like a lot, partly because it's close to home, partly because I've done research in Germantown myself, and also because, hey, there's some pretty clear audio of this thing that does not sound like a neighborhood dog, howling off in the woods. And it's in an area that has had a lot of historical activity and a lot of recent activity and sightings.
Great stuff right there, man. I definitely think sometimes that when people find these canine tracks and they're like, oh, there's no wolves in this area. Well, yes, there might not technically be an active population, yet a lot of people don't realize. So while hunting, this isn't that far of a range, but wolves will go around 20 to 30 miles away from their dens or their areas where they lay. Okay, that's not anything too massive, right? But check this out, man. They have been seen over 600 miles away from their dens, basically scouting areas. Is that not plausible that maybe from Michigan or Wisconsin, then this wolf could easily, or these wolves could go down into Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio?
It certainly is a possibility. I mean, you're absolutely right. Animals do migrate. Especially males will go all over looking for a mate, looking, for a new territory. Males tend to get pushed out of packs if they're not the dominant one of that pack. So absolutely, that is very much a possibility. You drew those lines on the map. The animals have no conception of boundaries or borders, that's for sure.
Yes. And a couple cool notes right here. And before we tie this up is I encourage anyone to check out Canadian wolves. They are absolutely gigantuous. Yes. Black wolves are super rare. The reason black wolves even exist is at points in time when they had hung out with domesticated dogs.
Coyotes will eat dogs. There's no question about that. But they'll also breed with dogs.
Is there anything else you would like to touch base on tonight or mention before we let you get back to things you need to attend to?
For anyone listening, these are just my theories, and they've evolved over time, and I've had many different theories. I've, for periods of time, been convinced that they were absolutely biological creatures. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It's just, where my brain is at now, trying to square the circle, trying to explain things that are unexplainable. And for me, that meant going very much outside the box. And I'm not saying you all have to, or I think less of anyone who doesn't. I don't even disagree with people who don't see it how I see it. This is just a theory. It's the one that I've kind of taken to heart in recent times. So, don't feel like you have to do it just because you heard me explain it that way.
Beautiful stuff right there, my friend. Well, as always, thank you for hanging out with us tonight, my friend, investing some more knowledge, brain power into this topic.
Well, I appreciate it. I enjoy coming on every couple of weeks and talking with you, and just shooting the breeze. It's really good. So thank you.
Ooh, my creatures of the night, every single one of you legends, I do adore you. Thank you for stopping in tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the truth to the algorithm. And remember, there are things that are very scary that go bump in the night.